The Nevada desert stretches for 100 miles without apology. No roads, no sound, nothing but rock and sky, and the particular silence of a place that has forgotten what it means to be interrupted. Then the sky breaks open. A streak of blue light crosses the upper atmosphere. Wrong color for a meteor. Wrong angle for anything natural. Something is falling, but not the way things fall when no one is steering them. The smoke rises from beyond the eastern ridge. A man on a motorcycle crests the ridge and stops. Below him, wreckage that should not exist on this planet. Metal that catches the dying light and turns it into something iridescent, something alive. And in the center of it all, a shape that is not part of the wreckage. Golden hair against dark metal. Wounds that do not bleed. They glow. He should ride away. Every rational instinct he has tells him to ride away. He doesn't. Part 1. The Woman in the Wreckage. The Nevada desert does not care about you. That is the first thing Dex Harlan understood when he moved out here. 3 years ago, after the funerals, after the paperwork, after the handshakes from men in pressed uniforms who looked at him with something that was almost sympathy, but was really just relief. Relief that it had been his team and not theirs. The desert does not grieve. It does not remember. It just sits there, vast and indifferent, burning in the day, freezing at night, and absolutely, completely silent. Dex needed that silence the way other men needed whiskey. He had a small camp, nothing fancy. A canvas tent staked between two rock outcroppings about 40 miles from the nearest paved road. A fire pit ringed with stones he had carried from a dry creek bed. A camp stove that worked 2 out of 3 times if you held the igniter at the right angle and said the right words, which were not words he would repeat in company. A folding chair that had seen better decades. And a view of the sky that stretched from one edge of the world to the other without interruption. Every evening, without fail, he sat in that chair and looked up, not because he expected anything, not because he was waiting for something to happen. He had stopped waiting for things. Waiting implied hope, and hope was a thing he had carefully, deliberately, surgically removed from himself over the better part of 3 years. The way you remove a splinter, before it can fester, before it can work its way deeper than you meant to let it go. He looked up because it was the one direction where nothing had died yet. This particular evening, the sky was doing something extraordinary. Orange bleeding into violet at the western ridge. The last edge of the sun pulling itself below the horizon like it was exhausted. Like it had been holding up the whole day and finally got to put it down. A hawk drifted in lazy circles above the canyon to the east. Riding thermals, going nowhere in particular. Dex had a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. He hadn't noticed. He was watching the hawk and thinking nothing specific, which was the closest thing to peace he had managed to find out here. He understood that hawk on a level that required no analysis. And then, the sky broke open. Not sound first. That came after. First there was light, a streak of it crossing the upper atmosphere at an angle that made Dex's jaw tighten before his conscious mind had caught up with why. Wrong color for a meteor. Too blue at the edges. And the trajectory controlled at first. The unmistakable arc of something being steered. Then the correction failed, and it stopped being controlled at all. He had seen things fall from the sky before, in places he was not supposed to be. Things that fell like that at that angle with that specific sequence of controlled then not those things were not rocks. He was on his feet before the coffee cup hit the dirt. The impact came from somewhere behind the eastern ridge. He felt it before he heard it. A deep percussive thud that traveled through the ground and up through his boots and into his chest. Then the sound rolled across the desert. Low. Wrong. Like thunder stripped of everything that made thunder familiar. Then smoke. Black and gray. Rising from somewhere beyond the ridge, catching the last of the orange light and turning it into something that did not belong to this landscape. Dex stood there for 4 seconds. 4 seconds was about 3 longer than he wanted to spend thinking about what he was doing. He got on the bike. The canyon trail was not really a trail, more like a suggestion made by decades of flash floods and the optimism of desert goats. Dex had driven it enough times in daylight that he knew every drop and turn by feel. In the dying light, with smoke thickening on the horizon, he drove the way he used to move through unfamiliar buildings in places whose names he still did not say out loud. Fast, low, committed to the direction. The smell reached him before the sight did. Not just burning, burning mixed with something else, something sharp and metallic and faintly electric. Like the air after a lightning strike, but layered over something organic that had no name in any category he owned. He smelled it and thought, I know this. Then no, I don't. Then why do I think I do? He pushed all three thoughts aside and kept riding. The crater came into view as he crested the ridge. He stopped the bike, cut the engine, sat without moving for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, because what was down there did not fit inside any framework his mind had available. The craft, and he was certain it was a craft with a certainty that lived somewhere below rational thought, in the part of him that had spent 12 years learning to recognize the geometry of things built with intention, was roughly the size of a large truck, or what remained of it was. The hull had torn along two seams, the metal curling back in ways that suggested failure from the inside rather than impact from the outside. Dark material, almost black with a surface that caught the remaining light and turned it iridescent. Not oil on water iridescent. More like the inside of an abalone shell if the shell had been engineered. Geometric panels, some intact, others shattered into configurations that followed no structural logic he had spent 20 years learning to read. Heat rippled upward from the crater. He could feel it from 30 feet above. Across the crater floor pieces. A sphere no larger than a baseball, still rolling in a slow arc, trailing pale blue light that faded as it moved. A panel of something translucent, cracked through symbols, moving across its surface. Not static, moving like text, composing itself in a language none of the instruments on this planet were built to receive. He cataloged the reasons to leave, quickly, efficiently. One, this was so far above his pay grade it wasn't in the same atmosphere. Two, whatever agency was supposed to respond to something like this was already tracking it. Had to be. Three, nothing he could contribute here would make anything better, and several things he could contribute would make things considerably worse. He counted those reasons, acknowledged them, and then looked back at the crater. Because there was a shape in the wreckage that was not a piece of the ship. He was moving down the ridge before he had completed the thought that was telling him not to. She was wedged against what remained of the inner hull, pressed into a space that should not have protected anything but had. The specific geometry of destruction that sometimes rarely unplanned through no logic anyone could replicate created a pocket of survivability. Her hair was gold. That was what registered first. Gold the way certain late afternoon light is gold, the way autumn wheat is gold when the sun is at exactly the right angle. Spread out against the dark metal like something deliberately placed. Her skin was pale, white in the way marble is white, not absence of color, but presence of a different one, cool and almost luminous, even through the dust, in what appeared to be blood that was not quite the right shade of red. She wore something that was not fabric, fitted to her body precisely with paneling and structural joints that shifted slightly when she breathed. And she was breathing. That was the critical information. Shallow and uneven but present. The wounds were unlike anything he had seen in 12 years of seeing things that were unlike anything he had seen. 3 of them, one along her left side, one across her right collarbone, one at the back of her left hand. They were not bleeding. They were glowing. A cold blue-white light pulsing weakly from each wound, dimming as he watched, like a battery in its last percentage points. Dex knelt beside her, medic training running automatically, the conscious part of his brain briefly overwhelmed by the gap between what he was trained to address and what he was looking at. Airway, clear, breathing, present, pulse. He found it at her neck. The rhythm was there, but the spacing was off, like a familiar song played in a time signature that was almost right but not quite. Still, a pulse was a pulse, regardless of what generated it. He looked at her face. Even like this, even covered in dust and completely still, there was no word that wasn't inadequate. Beautiful in a way that was not comfortable, in a way that cost him a moment he could not afford, and then he looked away and focused on the work. He swept the area for immediate threats, clear. Then he climbed back to the bike, got the med kit, got his jacket, got the emergency thermal blanket from the left saddlebag. He climbed back down. He was arranging the thermal blanket around her when he found the first device. Small, the size of a deck of cards, matte black, tucked under a piece of hull plating about 8 feet from where she lay, partially buried in the disturbed soil. He stopped. He knew that device. He sat back and stared at it, his mind doing the thing it sometimes did when certain kinds of knowledge surfaced, reaching for the source, getting close, then losing it. Shape of a room, quality of specific light, someone placing something like this in his hands and saying, "Signal suppression unit, U.S. military issue." The model used in black operations to create dead zones for satellite and ground-based tracking. He knew the weight of it, the slight resistance in the activation switch, the frequency range. What he did not know was when, or where, or which mission, or who had handed it to him. He found 4 more with methodical sweeps of the crater, 5 total arranged in a rough perimeter, not placed in the crash, placed before the crash, at intervals that made sense only if someone had known with reasonable precision where this ship was going to come down. Someone on this planet had known the ship was arriving. Someone had made sure it would not be tracked. Dex stood in the crash site with the desert cooling around him and something very cold settling into the base of his spine. Not fear. That particular circuitry had been worn to a nub. This was something more precise. The alertness of a man who has just understood that the situation he thought he was looking at has layers he cannot currently see the bottom of. He looked at her, the blue-white light from her wound still pulsing. Dimmer. He gathered her up carefully. She weighed less than he expected. Her head came to rest against his shoulder. Her golden hair spilled across his arm. "Okay," he said quietly to the darkening desert, to the stars beginning to appear at the edges of the sky. "Okay." And he carried her out of the crater. The ride back to camp was slow, one arm around her, one hand on the bars, her weight against him with the particular stillness of someone whose system had gone into emergency conservation. Not sleep. Sleep has peace in it. This was something else. He got her into the tent, laid her on the cot. Thermal blanket, his spare jacket folded beneath her head. He sat back and thought about what to do next. The wounds first. He could not ignore them. The blue-white glow had stabilized, which might mean healing or might mean something else entirely. He had no framework for this. He was a medic trained for human biology working on someone whose biology he did not understand in a tent in the Nevada desert with a kit designed for none of this. He did what he could, clean gauze over each wound with gentle pressure. No antiseptic, his instinct said chemicals formulated for human tissue applied to hers could do more damage than they prevented. Water from his canteen at her lips. She stirred at that, just slightly, her lips parting. He gave her a careful amount and no more. He sat back in the camp chair he had dragged to the tent entrance, rifle across his knees. Not because he thought it would be particularly effective against whatever was going to come looking for this crash site, because it was familiar, and familiar was something to hold on to when everything else had just become foreign. He watched the sky through the tent opening. The stars came out fully, quiet, undisturbed. He thought about the signal suppression units. He thought about the fact that he recognized them and could not explain why. The knowledge was in him, fully formed, attached to no memory he could locate. He had gaps. He had known that for a long time. After he came home from the last mission, the one he could approach only from the edges, never directly, there had been days unaccounted for. A period of several weeks he could only partially reconstruct. The doctors had said trauma response, dissociation, the mind protecting itself. He had accepted that explanation because the alternative was to keep pulling the thread, and he had learned with some pain that certain threads, when pulled, do not open only the seam you intended. They take everything with them. So he had stopped pulling. He looked at the woman on his cot. She had shifted in the night, her wounded hand resting against her chest now, the glow from the injuries holding steady. Her face in the lamplight was very still. Her eyelashes, he noticed, were silver at the very tips. Not dyed, just that color. "I need you to not die," he said, quietly to the air. "Not because I know what to do if you do. I don't. It would be better if you didn't." She did not respond. He watched the sky until it went gray at the edges, then pink, then the desert admitted with its usual reluctance that it was morning. She opened her eyes at 7:30. Dex was at the camp stove making coffee with the focused attention of a man who needed something specific to do with his hands. He heard the change in her breathing before she moved. Turned. She was looking at him. Her eyes. Silver. Not gray, not pale blue. Silver like the surface of still water in overcast light, and at the edges of the iris flickers of violet that deepened as she focused. As she looked at him. Neither of them moved for a moment. Two people who had walked around a corner into something entirely unexpected, neither yet having decided what to do about it. She tried to sit up. Got part way. Her hand went to her side and her expression tightened, not a gasp more, like a careful internal recalibration. A decision to register the pain without being governed by it. "Easy." Dex held both hands up, palms out. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." She looked at his hands, then his face, then around the tent, cataloging with the efficiency of someone who had been trained to do exactly that. Her gaze stopped on the bandages. She held the look for a long moment. Then she reached into the collar of her suit and withdrew something small, flat, and coin-sized with a surface that shifted as he watched. She placed it against her sternum and pressed it once. She spoke. Soft consonants and vowels that moved in ways English didn't, that had a musical quality not because they were gentle, but because they were precise. Each sound placed exactly. A delay of less than 1 second. Then overlaid on her voice in English with a quality that was slightly mechanical but clear. "You saved me." Not a question. "Found you," Dex said. "In the crash. You were in bad shape." A brief pause while she processed the translation. Then why? One word, no upward inflection. The tone of someone asking a factual question for which they genuinely need a factual answer. Dex thought about it for a second. "Couldn't leave you there." "You did not know what I was." "Still don't," he said. "Didn't change the math." She held his gaze for a long time, the silver and violet reading him in a way that was not comfortable and not threatening, more like being measured by an instrument that was very good at its job. "Human," she said finally. "Last I checked." Something changed at the corner of her mouth. Barely. The first indication that her expression had a range wider than controlled assessment. "I am Alith," she said, "of Sovereign Reach." "Dex Harlan," he said, "of Nevada." She slept again for most of that first day. He let her. He checked the perimeter, covered what tracks he could from the previous night, stood over the 5 signal suppression units he had arranged in the line outside the tent, and looked at them for a long time without touching them. He thought about calling someone, then thought about who he would call and what would follow that call and what would happen to the woman in the tent after it. He had enough experience with how things get classified and contained and quietly disappear to have a clear sense of what that call would set in motion. None of the outcomes he could project were good for her. He didn't make the call. He made soup instead. From a can because it was what he had. He carried it in when she woke again. She was sitting up, examining her bandaged hand with professional detachment. "I don't know if you can eat this," he said. She looked at the cup, then at him. I do not know either. Chicken soup. A pause. Translation processing. What is a chicken? A bird. We eat them. She looked at the cup again. Something moved through her expression, not disgust exactly, more like the philosophical acceptance of someone encountering an unfamiliar cultural practice and deciding to engage with it. She took the cup, tried a small amount. A pause. It is acceptable, the translation device said. High praise. I did not die. Also high praise. That near smile again, the same small movement at the edge of her mouth. He asked about the ship. She told him in the flat, efficient cadence of someone delivering a report the navigation system had been compromised before departure. Not by the crash. Before. Something introduced into the drive systems. She had attempted a manual correction. Failed. It was not an accident, she said. The damage. Yes, my ship was prepared to fail by someone with access to it. A pause. Someone who worked closely with me. Following an order from above, her eyes moved to his. Yes. From who? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then the High Council of Sovereign Reach. They control the military authority, the information systems, the resource allocation. A pause. They have controlled my father for 12 years. He no longer always knows where his choices end and theirs begin. Dex said nothing. My father did not order this. She said it directly, holding his gaze. Whatever your assumptions about how these structures work, he did not order this. What did you do, Dex asked, to make them want you dead? She looked at the tent wall, at something on the other side of it that was not canvas. I found evidence, she said, in the Council's restricted archive, a significant amount of it. The war that Sovereign Reach has been fighting for the last 6 years, it was constructed, built on fabricated threat assessments and falsified intelligence. 11,000 lives lost on 4 planets to consolidate specific resource routes under Council control. She came back to him. I brought the evidence to the Council's own tribunal, as is my legal right as a member of the ruling family. And 3 days later, Dex said. 3 days later, she said. He looked at the dented tin cup in his hand. The mundane, specific reality of sitting in a canvas tent in the Nevada desert with a woman from somewhere in the galaxy who was describing the deliberate manufacture of a war with the exhausted flatness of someone who has been carrying that knowledge for too long to be shocked by it anymore. He recognized that particular exhaustion. He had worn it himself. They think they succeeded, he said. The assassination. For now, they believe the crash was unsurvivable. Her hand moved to her collarbone. The bandage. Your intervention was not part of their calculation. Your father doesn't know you're alive. No. He set the cup down. That's going to change, because whatever comes looking for that crash site is going to figure out pretty fast that survivable is exactly what it was. When they don't find a body. She had already been through this calculation. The lack of reaction told him that. I know. How long before they send someone, she considered. They will want confirmation before committing significant resources. Reconnaissance first, 2 days, perhaps 3. Then once they confirm the site is survivable, and I am not there, they will send people. How many? Enough, she said. They will not undercommit twice. Dex stood. Rest. I need to look at something outside. He stood over the 5 signal suppression units for a long time. He picked one up, turned it over. On the underside, a stamped production code alphanumeric, the format he recognized from military inventory systems he had used or had been shown or had handled in some context he could not locate. He put it down. The fact says he could assemble them. Someone had known this ship was arriving. Someone had prepositioned equipment to suppress tracking of the crash site. That equipment was American. Military grade. Black operations specification. 2 interpretations. Either someone wanted the crash site protected, wanted the ship to go undetected, which might mean they wanted to protect Aelith. Or someone wanted the crash to be clean. No evidence, no survivor. Which would mean the people who sabotaged her ship had reached that extended to this planet. Both possibilities were deeply uncomfortable, for different reasons. He walked the perimeter, checked things, thought. He came back in when the temperature dropped. Aelith was asleep again, facing the tent wall, her golden hair across the jacket beneath her head, one bandaged hand near her chin. He sat in the chair. He did not sleep. He watched the strip of star-thick sky visible through the tent gap and thought about the kinds of trouble that arrived without announcement and then refused to leave. He had thought he was finished with that kind of trouble. He had been wrong about a lot of things. By morning she had changed, not recovered nowhere close, but the color in her face had shifted towards something that suggested viable rather than failing. The wounds were cooler, the glow steady, not dimming. She moved with intention when she sat up, ate without commenting on what she was eating. She watched him move around the camp with the tracking quality he had noticed when she first woke, learning the space, reading his patterns. "You were a soldier," she said, not a question. "Army Ranger, 12 years. You left." He was at the camp stove back to her. "Not exactly. My team died in a mission." A pause. "I didn't." A moment of quiet in the tent. "I'm sorry," she said. The translation device gave the words a slightly mechanical quality, but the weight behind them was not mechanical at all. He turned his head slightly. She was looking at him with something he did not have precise language for. Recognition, maybe, of the specific geography of what he had described. 11 years ago, he said. Came out here after. Kept thinking I'd go back eventually. And, stopped thinking that about 2 years in." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I fought alone for 9 years, in the council's administrative courts, in the archives, sending evidence to journalists who disappeared before they could publish it, building cases that were sealed before hearings could begin." A pause. "You learn things about yourself when you have been alone in a fight for a long time. What do you learn? That you are capable of more than you believed." She looked at her hands, the bandages, and that being capable of more than you believe can be a very solitary kind of knowledge, because there is no one to tell. Dex sat down, not because his legs were tired, because that sentence had landed somewhere specific in him and he needed a moment to let it settle. He knew that. He knew it from the inside. The strange specific isolation of being able to endure things that break other people with no one to explain it to and no way to make them understand, even if you tried. You just carry it. Forward, by yourself. They sat in a quiet that was for the first time not the quiet of strangers. "The crash," he said eventually. "Someone on your team altered the systems. My chief navigator, 12 years of service. He would have needed authorization from above him." "Yes." "All the way to the High Council." "Yes." Her eyes came to his. "Not to my father. I want you to understand that. You've said it twice now. I will say it as many times as it requires." She held his gaze. He did not order this. He thought about a man managed and maneuvered for 12 years by people with enough resources to fabricate the justification for a war. A man who Dex suspected still loved his daughter and had no idea she was breathing desert air in a tent in Nevada. He had seen that kind of erosion before in smaller scales and faster timelines. Good men. Men whose judgment got professionally carefully worn down until they made decisions they would not have recognized as theirs in the beginning. "I believe you," he said. She looked slightly surprised, like she had prepared for an argument. "Okay," he said. "The council has had about 4 days now to realize the crash might be survivable, which means—" He stopped. The silence had changed. A specific degree, imperceptible unless you had spent a long time learning to read silence as information rather than absence. He was up and at the tent entrance without rushing, controlled. He scanned the sky to the southeast, the last of the evening light catching something. Small, moving fast, angled panels that caught and released the light in a way no civilian drone design he knew would produce. Not civilian, not any military configuration from his service career. He watched it arc northeast away from camp, currently heading away. The sweep would bring it back. He went back inside. She was already watching his face. She read it before he spoke. "They are here," she said. Not a question. "One drone, reconnaissance. We have a few hours before it completes the pattern and reports back." She began to move. He held out a hand not to stop her, to say carefully. She took it, used it to steady herself as she stood. She was taller than carrying her had suggested. Eye level was close. In the small space of the tent, the distance between them had a quality that he registered and deliberately did not engage with. He stepped back, practical. "Can you ride? I can learn." 20 minutes, we're moving." She looked around the tent, then at him. Dex Harlan. The translation device gave his name back in her voice without the slight mechanical flatness it usually applied to processed words. Something of how it actually sounded in her language came through. "Why are you helping me?" Different from the first time she had asked. Not suspicious, not tactical, genuinely wanting to know. He thought about the signal suppression units, the gaps in his memory, the sense of something just out of reach at the edge of his understanding of his own past. He thought about 4 soldiers whose names he said to himself every morning: Marcus, Reyes, Tully, Kim. He thought about 12 years of exactly following orders from people who had known more than they told him, and one mission that only he had come back from, and still not knowing the full truth of why. He thought about the moment he had looked at her in the crater and moved toward her instead of away. "I've left enough people behind," he said. "I'm done doing that." She looked at him for a long time, the silver and violet going through him rather than past him. "I see," she said, and somehow it felt exactly like she did. They moved at dusk, the bike carrying both of them through the deepening dark, her arms around him, her weight against his back, the desert opening up in every direction. Behind them, the camp, the tin cup, the cold stove. 3 years of mornings in that chair looking at a sky that had not given him anything because he had stopped being the kind of person who asked. Ahead, a canyon system he knew by feel, rock and shadow and darkness that concealed. The drone swept back across the northern sky, did not find them. Dex drove deeper into the canyon, no hesitation, committed to the direction the same way he had driven toward the crash site. Some decisions once made do not benefit from being revisited. He had found her. He was not leaving her. Whatever came next, they would face it from here. The stars above the canyon that night were extraordinary, dense and unchanged and indifferent in exactly the right ways. Alith sat wrapped in the thermal blanket while Dex made the camp functional. He watched her look up at them, saw something move across her face that was private and not meant for him. But he saw it. The weight of being far from something you loved, looking at the light of it from a very great distance. "Is that it?" he said eventually. "Your system. Which one?" She scanned the sky slowly, stopped. There, the blue-white one, on the eastern edge of that grouping. He found it. A star. Faint but clear. "Looks cold," he said. "It is not." A pause. "It is very warm, but from a distance things that are warm can look cold. The color is not the temperature." She was still looking at it. "My mother used to say that," she said, "about anything that matters from far away, that we mistake the color for the temperature, that we decide something is cold because we are looking at it from too far away to feel it." Dex said nothing. Let the sentence stay in the air where she had put it. After a while, she looked back at him. "What do we do tomorrow?" "We start getting ready," he said. "For what?" "For whoever they send after the drone." She nodded, looked at the blue-white star once more, then looked away. "Then we should sleep," she said. "Yeah." He set a 2-hour watch and took the first one himself, sat with his rifle in the particular enclosed quiet of the canyon, which was different from the open desert quiet, more specific, more intimate. He thought about the signal suppression units, about the gaps in his memory, about the word threshold that had surfaced in his mind when he handled them, a word connected to something he could not access, a word that felt like it belonged to him and did not belong to anything he could remember. He thought about the fact that he had lived in this specific desert for 3 years, and tonight a spacecraft had come down within 30 miles of him. He thought about probability. He thought about things that are not accidents. He filed those thoughts in the place where things went when he needed them later and could not deal with them now. In the tent behind him, a woman from another world slept in his spare jacket, her golden hair and her silver eyes and her wounds quietly, stubbornly holding steady, which was enough. For tonight, it was enough. Part 2. What the blood remembers. The canyon did not welcome them. It simply allowed them. The way certain hard places allow certain hard people, not with warmth, not with invitation, just with the particular indifference of stone and shadow that says you may stay here. Whether you survive is entirely your matter. Dex had spent time alone in that canyon before. He knew where the walls narrowed to passages a single person could hold against several, where the floor dropped unexpectedly, where the runoff channels cut hidden routes between rock faces that looked solid from 30 yards out. He knew it the way you know a place you have spent long hours in alone, honestly if not intimately. He showed Aelith the canyon the way he showed her everything, without preamble, without waiting to see if she was ready. Just here is the thing, here is how it works, here is why it matters. She learned quickly, faster than he expected. After the first day, he stopped saying so because she gave him a look every time he did, patient, precise, that said clearly, why would you expect otherwise? He took the point. The first morning they trained, not because he had designed a program, because his hands needed something to do that was not turning the signal suppression units over in his mind, and his mouth needed something to say that was not the questions he couldn't answer yet. He started with what he knew. Terrain, he said, moving through the canyon, not waiting for her to follow. She did. You fight in any environment, you start with the ground. You know it before you need it. Before, not during. During is too late. She walked beside him, slightly behind, watching his feet and then the walls and then the sky, taking in more at once than most people bothered to attempt. In Sovereign Reach, she said, we trained in zero gravity first. Gravity was introduced later after the fundamentals were established. Different priority structure. Yes. She looked at the canyon walls, pressing in on either side. Here the ground seems to always be trying to kill you. The ground is neutral, Dex said. It's what's on top of it you need to worry about. She considered that for a moment. That is a useful reframe. They walked another 30 yards in quiet. Your team, she said, careful, not prying, just placing the question in the space and letting him decide what to do with it. 4 of them, he said. He did not say their names then. He was not ready to give their names to someone he had known for 3 days. Good soldiers, better people than me in most of the ways that count. She said nothing, but she stayed slightly closer after that, not touching, just present. On the second morning, she was watching him move through a narrow pass between boulders and said without particular emphasis, "You telegraph." He stopped. Say that again. Your left shoulder drops before you change direction. Any trained opponent will read it. They will have already moved before you have committed. He turned to look at her. She looked back. Show me, he said. What she showed him was not what he had expected. She moved through the Sovereign Reach combat techniques. The way water moves through a channel, not fast, but with a logic so internally consistent that each element connected to the next without gap or pause. No wasted energy, no margin of redundancy. Her arms tracing arcs that generated force not through raw mechanics, but through an understanding of leverage and timing that made 12 years of Army Ranger training feel like a rough draft. She could not, however, drive the bike, could not read a topographic map, could not identify which desert plants held water. did not know what a field ration was or why any military organization had ever thought the contents of one constituted food. So they traded. Mornings his things, afternoons hers, evenings the practical work of surviving in a canyon with limited supplies in uncertain time. It was not comfortable. There were moments of friction points where her approach and his approach were simply different in ways that could not be resolved by either of them being right, and they had to build a third approach that belonged to neither of them. Those moments were also, Dex noticed, the moments when the distance between them changed character. Not agreement, not friendship yet. More like two separate instruments discovering they could produce the same note from opposite ends of the scale. He noticed it. He didn't examine it. On the third day, the drone came back. Not over their camp. Dex had moved the camp twice and knew how to stay one pattern ahead of standard aerial reconnaissance. But the drone's return confirmed the timeline was moving. Confirmation of crash survivability achieved. Next phase, human response. He told Aelith. I know, she said. They were at the small evening fire sheltered between rocks. Her wounds had faded to faint traces, the blue-white almost entirely gone. I've been calculating it. We should talk about what happens when they arrive. Yes. She looked into the fire, then, but there is something I need to tell you first. He recognized the quality of that sentence, set down what he was holding. She reached into the neck of her suit and withdrew something small, a crystal about the size of his thumbnail, clear with a warm light at its center that was constant, not pulsing, not fading, just holding. My mother gave this to me, she said. Before she died, I was 7. He waited. I wore it because she was gone and it was hers. For 21 years, I wore it as a memorial and nothing more. She turned it slowly in her fingers. 2 years ago, in the Council's restricted archive, among the documents that confirmed the war was manufactured, I found a treaty record. The fire cracked. The canyon was very quiet around them. My mother, Aelith said, was not only my father's consort, she was a diplomat. One of the finest Sovereign Reach had produced in a century. 23 years ago, she spent 3 years in active negotiation with 7 neighboring star systems that would have preferred to go to war. She learned 4 languages to do it. She made commitments on behalf of Sovereign Reach that required placing real trust in people who had every reason to refuse to trust her back. She closed her hand around the crystal gently. She came home when it was done and said nothing about it. Not to me, not to anyone as far as I could find. Dex absorbed the shape of what she was building toward. The treaty she signed. Established trade agreements, non-aggression frameworks, conflict resolution protocols, a genuine peace architecture for a region that had been contested for generations. A pause. For the 6 star systems that Sovereign Reach has been at war with for 6 years. The fire cracked again. So the war, Dex said, is illegal under a treaty that was already in place when it started. The Council knew the treaty existed. They had to have known. They suppressed it. The war cannot stand if the treaty is public and authenticated. Everything they have engineered through the conflict, the resource consolidation, the trade route control, the political realignment, it collapses. He looked at the crystal in her hand. Such a small thing, warm and steady and quiet. That is the treaty seal, she said. Authentication device. It contains the original encrypted treaty record and my mother's biometric signature. Verification requires someone with Velthor bloodline. She paused. Which is why destroying me and destroying it are the same objective. And you didn't know what you were carrying. For 21 years, no. She closed her fingers around it. I think she knew. I think she knew that someday someone would need it. I think she hoped it would not require this. Something shifted in Dex's chest, old and quiet. Mothers usually do, he said. She looked at him, not with surprise, with recognition, he thought. With the specific recognition of someone who understood what it meant to be shaped by a parent you lost too early to fully know. He woke at 400 to the wrong quality of silence. moving before fully conscious. Rifle, tent entrance, eyes adjusting to the dark. Across the south wall of the canyon, approximately 300 yards out movement. Low, deliberate, not animal. The specific way trained men move when they are trying not to be seen, which has a particular rhythm to it that Dex recognized at the level of instinct. He counted what he could in the dark, not a full count, but enough. He went back in, touched Aelith's shoulder. She was awake before his hand lifted. South wall, he said. Quiet. Incoming, 10 maybe more. She sat up in one motion, reaching for her suit. Their orders will be confirmation and elimination. They will not offer terms. Good. He handed her the plasma rifle they had salvaged from the drone on day 2. I hate terms. She almost smiled. Almost. The near expression he had begun to recognize. Come on, he said. The canyon worked with them. That was how he had thought about it since the first morning he'd walked it with her, if they knew the terrain and the enemy didn't. Then the terrain itself was an asset on their side. He put her on the high ledge first. 40 feet up the east wall, a natural shelf with clear sight lines down the main channel and enough rock to hide behind. Then he took the lower position, the crook between two specific boulders at the southern narrows, where the canyon squeezed down to a width that channeled movement. And he waited. Patience was the discipline. The one discipline that nobody wanted to develop because it required abandoning the sensation of doing something. Just sitting in the dark, just being ready, just knowing without acting until the moment when acting was exactly right. The first man came through the southern entrance at 0428. Dark armor segmented that moved with the wearer rather than resisting him. Helmet with a visor that would be processing heat signatures, a problem Dex had worked around 2 days earlier by stacking cold rock behind the boulders. Enough thermal mass to confuse the readout for 30 seconds. He let the first man pass, the second, the third. Then he moved. The first wire repair cable from the bike, strung at ankle height across the canyon floor, between two specific formations, caught 2 of them. Small sound. Large stumble. Dex was already somewhere else when they fell. From the ledge above the crack of Aelith's plasma rifle. She had not fired it before this morning. She had held it, learned the balance of it, asked him specific technical questions about rate of dispersal and effective range. He had told her aim for the joint between the shoulder plate and the neck guard. Armor is thinnest there. She had nodded once and said nothing else. Her first shot found its mark. Her second was cleaner. 2 men down. Incapacitated, not dead. She had been clear about that distinction, and he had not argued. He understood it. You do not kill when you don't have to, and you rarely have to if you're precise enough. The remaining men regrouped fast. Good training. They folded into a defensive configuration and tracked the plasma shots back toward the ledge. Dex hit the second wire, lower sound. The small percussive charge he had built from a flare casing and 2 salvaged components from the dismantled drone. Not lethal, disorienting. A wall of sound and pressure that sent 3 men into the rocks and bought 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time if you know what to do with them. He moved in low fast the way the body knows, even when the mind has tried to put it away. 2 men, close exchanges. Not graceful, he had never been graceful. Grace required spare attention that he could not afford, but efficient. Efficient and ruthless about it. The remaining 5 pulled toward the canyon center. Then Aelith dropped from the ledge. 40 feet. She didn't fall. She controlled the descent using the rock face in a way he had no prior reference for, some sovereign reach technique that turned what should have been a dangerous drop into something that looked like punctuation. She landed and was already moving as the dust rose around her feet. He had 3 seconds to register this before the nearest soldier reached him, and there was no more time for registering anything. The engagement ran 8 minutes, longer than ideal. At minute 6, an armored forearm caught his left shoulder at an angle that sent information up to his brain that his brain categorized as, "This is going to be a problem," and filed for later. He registered it, kept moving. At minute 8-4 down, 4 incapacitated, 2 standing. The two standing men looked at each other, put their weapons down. Dex kept his rifle up, breathing hard, his left arm starting to go heavy in a way he recognized. Aelith walked past him toward the taller of the two standing men, the one who had gone still a beat before the other. She walked to within 3 feet of him, stopped, and the quality of her stillness changed into something different. Not tactical stillness, something older. He was the commander. Dex had read that early, the deference from the others, the quality of his armor, the precision of his movements that marked a man who had been doing this for longer than the men he led. He was looking at Aelith, or looking at something he had not expected to be looking at, something that had surfaced in his face through whatever professional architecture had been keeping it down. "Take off the helmet," Aelith said. Her voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something Dex could not name precisely. Something older than anger. Something older than fear. The man reached up, removed the helmet. The face underneath was hard, a jaw that had been clenched for a long time, dark eyes doing something complicated behind whatever blankness was keeping them organized. And under his left ear a scar, small, white, old. Ayla stopped breathing for exactly one breath. "Orin," she said. One word, the weight of 9 years in it, like something she had carried until now and had just now put down. The man the file from the drone had called him Commander Cade went completely still, the way things go still when a word lands in a place that was supposed to be sealed. "What did you say?" "Flat, controlled, but the control of a door whose hinge is beginning to give." "Your name," she said. "Your real name." She did not move toward him or back. "The scar under your left ear. You fell from the climbing frame in the east courtyard. You were 7 years old. I was 4. I watched you fall and I was too small to do anything, so I ran for help. You were very unhappy with how long that took." Nothing from him. "You told me I was too slow," she said, quieter. "And then you said, but you still came. That is enough." The canyon was completely silent. The desert held its breath. Dex stood to one side with his rifle and his damaged shoulder and made himself as invisible as a man standing in a canyon can make himself. Because what was happening in front of him was not his, was never going to be his. He was only a witness to the gravity of it. Cade's face was doing something it could not stop doing, something working through the trained surface, like water finding a crack in stone. Not fast, not chosen. "I don't," he said, pressed 2 fingers against his temple. "I don't." "I know," Aelith said. The gentleness in her voice was not soft. It was specific. The gentleness of someone who has prepared themselves completely to be gentle about the most devastating possible thing. "I know you don't remember. I know what they did to you. You were reported dead 9 years ago, in the border campaign. I believed it. I built a place inside myself to hold you, and I have been keeping it all this time." She paused. "I am still taking it apart, stone by stone." Cade's hand remained at his temple, his eyes closed. "Orin," she said the name again quietly, like testing whether it would hold the weight she needed it to carry. Something moved through him. Not memory, Dex could see clearly. It was not quite memory. More like the body recognizing something before the mind can confirm it. The way your hands know a shape in the dark before your eyes have the light to verify it. His eyes opened. He looked at her. "The climbing frame," he said, each word found separately. "East courtyard." "Yes." A long pause. Something surfacing through the layers of what had been built over it. "You were wearing something blue." She put her hand over her mouth. "One moment. Just one." "Yes," she said. Dex looked toward the canyon wall, gave them the only privacy a narrow desert passage allowed. He thought about what it meant to grieve someone for 9 years, to build your understanding of the world around their absence, and then to find them standing in front of you wearing 9 years of other people's construction over whoever they had been. He thought about what kind of people do that to a person, deliberately, systematically, as policy. His jaw tightened. They moved to a secondary position deeper in the canyon. Cade came with them, his second in command. The others left where they were. Not dead. They would recover. The question of what happened after that recovery was a problem for later. Cade moved like a man carrying something in his skull that kept redistributing its weight. Not unsteady trained men do not go unsteady, but carrying something, very visibly carrying something. Aelith appeared at Dex's left side. "Your shoulder," she said, functioning. "That is not what I asked." She sat beside him without asking and reached for his left arm. He started to object. She gave him a look that communicated with considerable economy that the objection was not going to be a useful expenditure of either of their time. He stopped objecting, her hands on his shoulder, not gentle, competent. There is a significant difference, and he had always respected the second more than the first. She read the damage the way you read something written in a language you are fluent in. "Not broken," she said. "Deep bruising, possible ligament involvement. You need to rest it." "Right." She looked at him with a look that meant she knew exactly how much he intended to rest it. He looked back with a look that meant correct. A small silence, the kind that belongs to two people who have been through something together and have nothing they need to say about it. Then quietly, so Cade could not hear, "Thank you. Not for the shoulder, not for the fight." He understood perfectly well what it was for. "Yeah," he said. The device from the dismantled drone was the size of a paperback. Matte surface with no visible interface until you knew where to press. Dex had known where to press since the second day in the canyon. He had not examined the knowledge. He had filed it alongside the signal suppression units and the word threshold and the specific gaps in his memory, and told himself later. Later arrived at 0200 of the fourth night. Aelith asleep. Cade doing whatever passed for sleep in a man whose sense of identity was currently being reconstructed from fragments. Dex at the canyon entrance with the device. He found the file on the third attempt. His name, his service number. A photograph from 12 years ago, younger, less worn, same eyes, and beneath that nothing from his military file. Project Threshold, Subject 7, clearance above top secret, authorization Voss L. He read slowly, very carefully. 18 years ago, he had been 22, just past initial recruitment into the Rangers. Someone had found him through a process the file described clinically as talent identification. Over 8 months, they had built what the file called a progressive exposure program, incremental introduction to classified information at a rate designed to prevent psychological destabilization. He had learned things that had been integrated carefully into his understanding of what was real and possible in the universe. Then, Lieutenant General Lester Voss had made a determination. The program was too exposed. Too many individuals with too much knowledge. Decision consolidate and contain. The word they used for what they did to him was memory suppression, conducted under the cover of a standard medical evaluation. Targeted and specific, not everything, just the threshold connections, just the parts that made the picture complete. He sat with that for a while. The cold canyon air, the stars above the narrow corridor of rock. He read on. The mission. 11 years ago, his team, 4 names the file listed with the flat precision of a personnel roster. He read that section 3 times. Because what the file said about that mission was not what he had been told. What he had been told: intelligence failure, bad information, the kind of tragedy that happens and cannot be attributed cleanly to any decision or any person. What the file said: the mission had been designed to fail. His team had stumbled into a position where they could report information that Voss needed, suppressed information about threshold, about what the program had actually contacted, about what the actual terms of the early agreement with Sovereign Reach had been. They had not been looking for it, but they had found it, and found was enough. Voss had ensured the mission would not succeed, and then Voss had arranged for Dex to be the only one who came home, because Dex was Subject 7. documented, already known to the program, an asset that might have future value. You cannot use a dead man. Dex sat in the cold canyon with this settling into him slowly, the way water works into cracked stone, finding every fissure, taking its time. Marcus, Reyes, Tully, Kim. He said their names, the way he said them every morning, and then he sat with the fact that their deaths had not been a failure of intelligence or a tragedy of circumstances. They had been a decision made by a man who had calculated that 4 lives were an acceptable operational cost for managing information he did not want managed by anyone else. He did not cry, not because crying was wrong, because the thing was too large and too structural to have a shape yet. It had changed the architecture of 11 years of understanding, and that kind of change required time he did not currently have. He picked the device back up and read the final section. His placement in the Nevada desert 3 years ago. He had believed he chose it. He had believed the instinct that drove him here, the need for space and silence and distance, was his own. There was a note in the file. Voss's handwriting. Digital but recognizably his asset relocated to proximity zone. Monitoring. Potential reactivation. He had been placed here. He had been watched. And when the ship came down inside his proximity zone, someone connected to Voss had deployed the signal suppression units to contain the crash, to ensure that whatever happened without outside interference, without someone who was not cleared for it becoming involved. Except Dex had ridden toward the smoke, because of course he had. He sat with all of it for a long time. He told Aelith in the morning. He waited until Cade was far enough down the canyon, then he sat across from her and told her everything. In order, without editing. She listened the way she listened to important things, without interrupting, her face still, just receiving it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Voss, she said, Lieutenant General Lester Voss, retired but still connected, still with Reach. He has been managing knowledge of sovereign Reach, on Earth, privately, for 18 years, for his own purposes, whatever those are. He's the one who positioned the suppression units. He wanted the crash site to disappear quietly. She looked at the canyon wall, something moving in her expression that she was containing carefully. He did not count on you. He thought he knew what I was, an erased asset in proximity, not a variable. She came back to him. He was wrong. People keep getting that wrong, Dex said. I don't know why. A silence. He had expected her to say something about the 4 men, about what the file said had happened to them. He had braced for it without knowing exactly what shape to brace for. Instead, Marcus, Reyes, Tully, Kim. She said all 4 names. He had told her their names once in passing on the first night in the tent. She had held them without being asked to. For 10 days she had held them. Something in his chest shifted, something that had been very tight for a very long time. Not releasing, just moving, enough to notice. Thank you, he said. She nodded. Once. Then what do we do about Voss? One thing at a time. He straightened. Whoever he has on the ground locally is going to realize the suppression units are gone. That I have them. That complicates the picture from their side. More people coming. Yes, and not just from your side. She took that in. So we are being sought by the High Council of Sovereign Reach, and by an American general who has been conducting unauthorized first contact for private benefit. That's the situation. She held his gaze, steady. You did not have to tell me about Voss. Yes, I did. Why? He met her eyes. Because you gave me everything you had, the treaty, your brother, what your mother left you. A pause. You can have everything I have too. That's what this is. Something in the silver and violet went very still and very certain. All right, she said. Then we plan. They planned, sat with what they had and what they could expect, and mapped out the terrain as best they could. Cade was not a solved problem. What had surfaced in him from the sound of his name was real. Dex was sure of that, but real was not reliable. 9 years of systematic erasure did not unknit because of a scar and a childhood memory. He would need time, more time than they had before the next engagement. Aelith sat with him for 2 hours that afternoon. Dex kept his distance. He could hear fragments, her voice low, patient, not telling Cade who he had been. That would have been pressure, not kindness. Just telling him what she remembered. Small things. The climbing frame, a particular argument about a meal they had both despised, a game with colored stones whose rules they had invented themselves and revised constantly. Things that could only be known by someone who had been there. A sister giving her brother a single thread, not the whole cloth, just something to hold. That was often all there was to work with. That night, the three of them around a small sheltered fire, Cade processing something enormous in the silence that trained people learned to conduct alone. Aelith across from Dex, the treaty seal in her palm, its warm light against her fingers. "My mother," she said, to the fire, to the night. Not specifically to either of them. "She died when I was 14. I remembered her as someone who preferred discussion to conflict, who was gentle in ways I sometimes mistook for softness." She turned the crystal slightly. The warm light shifted. "I did not know until I found the treaty record that she had spent 3 years negotiating with 7 systems that would have gone to war, that she had learned 4 languages for it, that she had extended trust to people who had no structural reason to accept it and had made it work anyway." She closed her hand around the crystal. She did all of that and came home and never once mentioned it. Dex said nothing. Sometimes nothing is the correct response. "I spent my life," she continued, "trying to win through precision, through evidence, through being irrefutably correct." A pause. "My mother did not win through being correct. She won by making herself vulnerable enough to be trusted." She paused again. "I am still learning what that requires, what it actually costs." Dex looked at her. He thought about 11 years of building distance, of making himself as unreachable as possible, because that was how you ensured that nothing you connected to could be used to damage you. That was what he had told himself it was. Safety, invulnerability, the rational response to what had happened. But sitting here, looking at her, thinking about what she had just described her mother doing. "I spent a long time," he said slowly, not looking at her, but at the fire, thinking that keeping people at a distance was the same as keeping them safe, keeping myself safe. He paused. "Took me a while to figure out that it was just distance. It wasn't safety. It was just alone." He hadn't planned to say that. It came out more directly than he intended, which was not how he usually operated. And he felt the exposure of it briefly before deciding he could live with it. She didn't say "me too," didn't say "same," just looked at him with the understanding of someone who knows the topography of that particular territory from the inside. "And now," she said, he looked at the fire. "Now I'm less convinced it was working." Across the fire, Cade did not look up, but something in the set of his shoulders changed by a small, specific degree. The signal came at 0300, not from the sky, from something hovering just above the ground to the south. Low frequency, powerful, cutting through the canyon's natural interference. Aelith was awake immediately. Cade was already at the entrance. The drone device screen lit up. Dex looked at it, then at Aelith. She crossed to him, read the screen. Her face did not change, but her hand found the edge of the rock beside her and held it. "He is alive," she said. Not grief, something more complicated than grief. Something that had reorganized itself around a different reality than the one it had been structured for. "Your father," Dex said. "He is requesting a channel. He says he has been outside the council's direct control for 3 weeks. She looked up. He has been looking for me since he found out about the crash. A pause, the signal continuing to pulse. You want to answer it, Dex said. She looked at him steadily. I am afraid to. The most honest thing she had said to him. In all the honest things she had said. This was a different kind. The kind that cost something specific in the saying. I know, Dex said. He may be what they made him into. After 12 years. Her voice controlled very carefully. He may not be my father anymore. He may be something wearing my father's face. Dex thought about that, about the fear of finding a parent had become someone you could not recognize, about the 12 years of erosion the file had described, about the man who had sent his daughter into an empire, being manipulated by people who thought they owned him. There's only one way to know, he said. A long pause. She looked at the pulsing signal, her jaw set. She reached out and opened the channel. The face that appeared was older than any record Dex had seen. Not just older in years, older in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long. Lines that told the story of it. Eyes that held the look Dex recognized from men who have been holding something together on pure will and are very near the limit of what pure will can sustain. His eyes found Aelith, and the Emperor was for one moment simply a father. Something crossed his face that was not for observers, not for Dex, not even for Aelith to witness really. Just there, present. The private devastation of a man who believed his daughter was dead and is now looking at her face. He recovered. The Emperor came back, but Dex had seen it. Aelith. The translation device gave his voice back in English. But the thing underneath the words needed no translation. She said something in her own language. Small. The device did not translate it. It did not need to. I did not know, her father said. When they told me the crash was unsurvivable, I believed them. For 6 days, I believed them. His jaw tightened. And then I began to ask questions I should have asked much earlier. Are you being monitored? Dex said. The man's eyes moved to him. A rapid, thorough assessment. Who is this? Someone keeping your daughter alive. Are you being monitored? A pause. Something that might have been surprised at being addressed that way by someone he had never encountered. And then under the surprise, something that might have been of all things faint relief. At the directness. At someone simply asking the question directly. I am in a shielded section, Sarath said. I have approximately 40 minutes. Then Dex asked the question he needed answered. You said you escaped the Council's control 3 weeks ago. The assassination attempt on your daughter happened 10 days ago. Why didn't you know it was coming? A long pause. Sorath looked at something off-screen for a moment. Because escaping their control was not immediate, he said. I began to act independently 3 weeks ago. Small things, information requests they were not aware of. But the military operations, the ships, the field teams, they still ran through command chains that I had only begun to untangle. I knew something was wrong. I did not know what. I did not know it was Aelith. He paused. When her ship went down, they told me it was a navigation failure, an accident. I believed it. For 6 days I believed it, because I did not want to believe they would. He stopped. His jaw worked. Then I started asking the right questions, and I could not stop. Dex absorbed that, filed it, it held together. The ship in your canyon, Sareth continued. It is not under my command. They are using my authority codes, my insignia, operating in my name without my knowledge or consent. Flat and furious. There is a fuel repository 3 miles north of your position. Old geological survey infrastructure. Abandoned for 16 years, but the structural systems are still in place. Dex's jaw set. He knew exactly what the Emperor was giving him. You're giving us a weapon, Dex said. I am giving you information, Soreth said carefully. What you choose to do with it is your decision. Dex looked at Aelith. She was looking at her father, the father who had not ordered her death, who had believed she was dead and spent 6 days in that belief before starting to ask the questions that brought him here. The father who had spent 12 years being managed and eroded and had started too late and too slowly to pull himself back. Father, she said. He looked at her. I know, he said. I know, Aelith. There are things I should have. Not now. Her voice, steady. Tell me what else we need. We will have time for the rest later. He looked at her for a long moment, something very large and very private moving through his aged face. Yes, he said. All right. And he told them. When the channel closed, the three of them sat in the silence. The stars had moved the small degrees that stars move between midnight and almost dawn. Cade was looking at the blank screen, something working slowly in his jaw. He started, stopped. Aelith waited. He sounded like someone I used to know. Careful, placing the words somewhere and not entirely sure they would hold. I don't remember him well. I don't remember most things well, but something about the way he pressed two fingers to his temple, the gesture he had developed for moments when something surfaced that he could not locate. There is something there, something that recognizes it. Even if I cannot, Aelith reached across and put her hand on his arm. Did not say anything. Did not need to. Dex looked at the two of them, the sister who had kept a grave for 9 years, the brother being rebuilt from pieces, finding a thread to hold, and the father on the other end of a closed channel somewhere on a ship he did not fully control, doing what he could with a very narrow window and an enormous amount of damage behind him. He thought about the people who turn human beings into assets, into tools, into variables and equations they never consented to be part of. He thought about what those people never understand about what they think they're removing when they do it. They think they're removing the connection, the love, the thing that makes a name said in the right voice surface through 9 years of deliberate erasure. They're wrong about that. Every time. Get some sleep, Dex said. Both of you. He picked up his rifle. I have the watch. Aelith looked at him. Your shoulder, she said. Is functional, he said. She gave him the look. He gave her the look back. And in the small space between those two looks, something that was almost a smile. On both sides of it, at the same time. The fire burned low. The stars moved their imperceptible degrees. Dex Harlan sat at the mouth of the canyon with his rifle and his damaged shoulder, and thought about 4 men whose deaths had been a decision, and a woman from another world who had trusted him with the most important thing she owned, and a father somewhere on a ship asking the right questions, 11 years too late, but asking them nonetheless, which was, he thought, often the best you could say about people. You ask the wrong questions for a long time. Then one day you start asking the right ones, and you do what you can from there. Part 3, One Choice. One time dawn came the way it always came in the Nevada desert, without apology. One moment the canyon was dark, the next it was gold. Not gradual, not gentle, just the sun deciding it was done, waiting and arriving all at once like someone who has been standing outside long enough and has decided to simply open the door. Dex had been up for 2 hours, not because he couldn't sleep, because there was too much that needed doing inside his head before the day started doing it for him. He had the plan mapped. Positions, timing, the sequence of events that needed to happen in approximately the right order for any of this to work. Approximately. That was always the word. Because no plan survives contact with the thing you plan for. He had known that for 20 years. The plan was not the outcome. The plan was what trained your nervous system to have options when the outcome turned out to be something else. He had options, not good ones, but options. He heard Aelith behind him before he turned around. He had learned the specific quality of her movement in 10 days of close proximity, different from anyone else's movement, recognizable at a range that was not something he had planned on developing, and his awareness of it had stopped being something he pretended not to have. Coffee, he said without turning. Camp stove, 2 minutes. I know where the camp stove is, she said. I know you know. A pause. You didn't sleep. I slept some. Dex? I slept enough for the day. He heard her settle near the stove, the particular sequence of sounds that meant she was making the coffee exactly the way she had watched him make it observed, once filed, reproduced. Because that was how she did everything. He turned around. She was crouched at the stove, her golden hair pulled back, her suit sealed, already completely ready. She had probably been ready since before she lay down. She had probably spent the night doing the same thing he had, going through the plan, finding the same gaps, making the same peace with them. She looked up and caught him looking. What, she said. Nothing. You were thinking something specific. I'm always thinking something specific. Something about today. He looked toward the canyon entrance, toward the direction the ship would come from. Thinking about the fuel repository timing, we need the ship inside the canyon walls before we trigger. Too early and they pull back. I know the timing, she said. I know you know. A beat of quiet. Dex. He looked at her. I know what today is, she said quietly. You don't need to fill it with logistics. He held her gaze, the silver and violet of it steady and clear. Right, he said. She handed him the coffee. Their fingers touched at the exchange, not accidentally, not prolonged, just present. And then both of them looking at something else, because today had enough in it already without adding to it. Cade was at the canyon entrance when they brought him the plan. He listened without interrupting. Whatever 9 years of council engineering had installed in him, it had also apparently included the ability to absorb tactical information without needing to comment on it mid-delivery. Dex respected that specifically. The repository, Cade said when Dex finished. 3 miles north. Your father's coordinates. Something moved through Cade's expression at the words your father. Complicated. Fast. Contained. I know that facility, he said. I ran reconnaissance on it 4 years ago for the council. They considered it as a staging site and rejected it. He paused, 2 fingers briefly at his temple, the gesture that appeared when something surfaced without its context. The pressure systems in the repository walls are degraded, severely compromised. Any significant explosive force in proximity doesn't produce a standard blast, it produces a cascade. The whole structure goes. Dex looked at him. That's not in the 16-year-old survey. No. Cade's jaw was set. The cascade potential is why the council rejected it. Too unpredictable. Blast radius approximately 3 times what a standard detonation would produce. Dex absorbed that. Looked at Aelith. She was already looking at him. That changes the timing, she said. Yes, we need the ship further into the canyon before we trigger, or the cascade takes us with the ship. Which means we need to hold the south approach longer than the original plan. Yes. The 3 of them sat with the new shape of the problem. The canyon was very still around them, the desert morning light coming down between the walls in flat gold angles. I can hold the south approach, Cade said. Not heroic, not dramatic. The flat tone of someone stating what equipment is available for a given task. I know their tactical doctrine. I know how they move, how they think, how they sequence their flanking. I can delay the south long enough to get the ship into position. Dex looked at him. Because Cade was not just saying, I can do this task. He was saying something else. With full knowledge of what holding the south approach against a council flank, while the primary detonation was occurring to the north, would mean for whoever was standing on that approach. No, Aelith said. Yes, Cade said. Orin, you just found me. He looked at her, his face still partially the stranger's face, the 9 years of construction still partially there. But underneath it, something that was not the stranger's at all. I understand what you're saying. I know. A breath careful and even. But if the south approach isn't held, the ship doesn't get into position. If the ship doesn't get into position, the cascade radius takes all of us. Not just me, all of us. A pause. This way, you have a chance. Aelith's jaw was very tight. There has to be another. There isn't, Dex said. She looked at him, hard, like she wanted to argue specifically with him. There isn't, he said again, quietly. I went through it. More than once. Last night. She turned away, looked at the canyon wall, her hand at her side in a fist. I just found you, she said. To the stone. To no one. No. Cade crossed to her, his movement slightly careful, the gentleness not yet entirely comfortable in him, still a language being learned back rather than spoken fluently. He put his hand on her shoulder, turned her gently. She let him. I know, he said. I know. He looked at her face, something in him working to reach through the reconstruction to what had been there before. You built a grave for me. 9 years. And I can't, most of it is still gone. He paused. But I remember enough. Enough to know that what I am doing today is the first thing I have chosen. For myself. Since. He didn't finish the since. He didn't need to. Let me choose it. Aelith's eyes, silver and violet and very bright. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. The way you press your hand against something to confirm it is real and present and still there. He covered her hand with his. They stood like that for a moment, the length of the moment belonging to them alone. Dex looked at something else, at the canyon walls, at the particular quality of the morning light. He said their names inside quietly. Marcus, Reyes, Tully, Kim. He thought today I'd do this right. They split at 700. 3 directions, 3 purposes. The plan clean the way plans are clean before they meet the day. Dex took the high ridge above the main canyon approach. The position with sight lines on the ship's descent path and the ability to time the detonator exactly. Small device. 1 button. Simplicity by design because complicated things fail when your hands are moving and someone is trying to stop them. He was not planning to be in that situation, but approximately. Aelith took the eastern wall. Her task draw the ship's attention and keep it engaged. Keep it moving forward. Keep it deep enough in the canyon that the blast radius had stone walls containing it. She was extraordinarily good at drawing the attention of things that needed to be focused on her. He had noticed that throughout. Not because she sought it, because she was exactly what the enemy needed to prioritize. And that priority was in this particular plan their most important weapon. Cade took the south. He did not say goodbye. Dex noticed that. He did not turn back. Did not make it into a last thing. He simply went. Moved into the shadow of the canyon wall and disappeared into the rock the way trained men disappear when they have made their decision and have nothing left to do but execute it. Aelith watched the place where he had been. Then she looked at Dex. One look, everything in it, nothing said. He nodded. She went east. He went up. The ship came at 0743. He felt it before he saw it. Not sound, something larger than sound. A low resonance in the air that lived in the chest and the base of the skull before it arrived anywhere the ears could process. He pressed himself flat against the ridge and watched the sky to the southeast. The shape of it, the council ship, larger than the one that had carried Sorath's channel signal, built for enforcement rather than diplomacy, dark, angular, moving with the particular deliberateness of something that has not expected resistance in a long time. He watched it descend toward the canyon entrance, measured its approach against the map he had built in his head. The position of the repository, the timing he needed, not yet. From the eastern wall, the crack of Aelith's plasma rifle, drawing the eye, drawing the ship. The ship adjusted its approach vector, Move toward the sound, precisely as planned. From the south, the sounds of Cade's engagement beginning. Fast exchanges, short pauses, movement in a confined space. The specific language of it. Dex did not let himself follow that thread. He watched the ship. Not yet. The ship moved further into the canyon, its belly visible. Weapons arrays along the lower edge tracking for heat signatures. Scanning for Aelith. From the east wall, another shot. Closer this time. The ship adjusted again. She was walking it in, moving along the wall and drawing it by the nose through the canyon like she had it on a lead. He could see exactly what she was doing, how she was doing it, the precision of the placement. Almost. Almost. The ship crossed the line he had marked in his head against the canyon walls. There. He pressed the button. The world rearranged itself. From the ridge, it felt less like an explosion and more like the earth deciding to correct something about its own structure. A massive concussive force traveling through the air and the rock and the ground beneath and coming up through his boots and his legs and his spine and briefly making the concept of direction a matter of personal opinion. The cascade. Cade had been right about it. The repository pressure system failing in sequence, and each failure driving the next a wave of force and heat and sound that was not any single thing, but all of them at once compressed. He looked through the dust and smoke. The ship was down, not destroyed, disabled. The lower third crumpled against the canyon floor. Weapons arrays dark, engines making the sound that engines make when they are no longer going to be engines. He looked south. Heavy smoke. The kind that tells you something significant is still resolving. He was moving down the ridge before the thought completed. Down fast, his shoulder informing him at some volume of its continued displeasure. Through the debris field. Over the pieces the cascade had redistributed across the canyon floor. Past the cooling hull sections. He said Cade's name. Quietly, not urgently. Just saying it the way you say something when moving toward it is all you can do and the saying fills the gap. He came around the bend in the south approach. Aelith was already there. She had come down from the eastern wall faster than he had come down from the ridge. He registered this and set it aside for later. She was on the ground beside her brother. Cade was alive. Dex confirmed that first. The chest moving, the eyes open, not fully, but open. His armor had taken the majority of the cascade force which had come from the north while he was facing south. The left side of the suit was damaged in ways that spoke to significant force having passed through it. But the chest moved. The eyes were open. Dex knelt on the other side. Chest, clear, airway, clear, pulse, strong enough, concussion almost certainly. Structural damage to the left shoulder that would need proper medical attention. The stillness of someone whose body had absorbed more than it wanted to and was currently taking stock. Orin, Aelith's voice, low, her palm against his jaw, tilting his head gently toward her. His eyes found her. Slowly, but found her. He started. Do not say fine, she said. A pause. Something that might have been on a different face, a faint expression. Present, he said instead. She exhaled. Not a sob, not a cry. Something between and entirely its own thing. She pressed her forehead to his for one moment. One only. Then she straightened. Because she was Aelith. Because there was still work. Dex stood. Turned. 2 council soldiers, 10 feet away, weapons raised. Survivors, always survivors. You always accounted for survivors. And he had not in this moment accounted for these 2, and his rifle was across his back, and his hands were empty. Approximately. Drop your weapon, the lead soldier said. The translation device on Aelith's suit giving it back in English. Dex calculated the distance. Fast, the options. Faster. Then a voice from the direction of the disabled ship. Stand down. The authority in that voice was real and recognizable. The kind that has been in a voice for decades and does not evacuate simply because the ship that voice belongs to is currently a wreck on a canyon floor. Emperor Sorath walked through the smoke, not slowly, not dramatically, walking like a man who has a direction and is committed to it. He had blood on his face from a cut above his right eye. His outer garments had not survived whatever the cascade had done to the section of ship he had been in when it hit. He looked like a man who had come through something significant and had not let it stop him. Stand down. 2 words, each one a wall. The soldiers lowered their weapons. Sorath walked past them, past Dex, stopped when he saw Aelith on the ground beside Cade. Stopped completely. A man who had been moving with intention. Stopping. Because what was in front of him was the thing he had believed was impossible for 9 years, and then for 6 days, and then for 3 weeks of desperate search. And it was lying in the dust of a Nevada canyon with his daughter's hand on his face. He went to his knees beside his son, on the side opposite Aelith. Put his hand on Cade's arm, did not speak, did not need to. Dex stepped back, turned away from the 3 of them, because that moment was not for him to witness any more of than he already had. He stood 30 feet away and watched the smoke thin out above the canyon walls. The structure still standing, the cascade contained. Enough, just enough. He thought about 4 men whose names he carried, and he said them not the way he had said them every morning for 11 years as a list of debts. As people who had deserved more than what they got, who had been used as acceptable costs in someone else's calculation. He said their names as people who had mattered and still did, and who he would not stop carrying, but who he could maybe carry differently than he had been. Voss was still out there. That thread was still there. The signal suppression units in their bag, the documentation on the device, the 18-year history of unauthorized management of first contact for private benefit. That would need addressing. Properly. Completely. Not today. He heard her footsteps before she reached him. Turned. Aelith came to stand beside him. Close. Shoulder near his good shoulder. Looking at the same thing he was looking at. How is he, Dex said. Alive? Hurting? A pause. My father is with him. Good. A silence. Your father, Dex said. He came through the blast field. Yes. He should have stayed in the ship. Yes. She turned her head and looked at him. He is still my father. Whatever they made him into over 12 years. Underneath it, he is still that. Dex said nothing. It will take time, she said. What he allowed. What he did not see that he should have seen years earlier. What happened to Orin while my father sat on a throne and could not distinguish his own choices from the council's instructions? Her voice level and careful. I am not ready to understand all of it. Not today. There is too much of it. But, Dex said. She looked at him. But I watched him go to his knees in the dirt beside a son he believed he had lost. And I thought that the person who does that is not only what those 12 years made him. A pause. That is worth something. Not everything. Something. Dex looked at the blast scoring on the canyon wall, at the marks left by a day that had been exactly what it had been. Yeah, he said, it's worth something. The afternoon was the necessary work of aftermath. The 9 remaining council soldiers secured and eventually addressed foot soldiers of a structure men who had followed orders, which was its own complicated moral territory, and not one Dex was going to resolve before dark. Communications established through the ship's remaining functional systems, Sorath reporting to the military leadership of Sovereign Reach that the Council had not compromised. The existence and authenticity of the treaty seal confirmed. The Council's unauthorized use of Imperial authority codes and insignia documented and reported. It was not a quick process. It was not a clean process. Dex stayed out of it. Not his language, not his governance structure. He brought water. He sat with Cade for an hour while Aelith was with her father, sitting with a man who was in pain and only partially reconstructed and needed presence more than conversation. Dex knew how to do that. It did not require words. She talked about you, Cade said at one point, looking at the sky, quiet. Dex said nothing. Before the battle, in the canyon, a pause. The way she talked about you. He stopped, started again. She does not know that I was listening. Right, Dex said. I am telling you, Cade said, because I am her brother. A long pause. And because you should know. Dex looked at the afternoon Nevada sky. Blue, vast, indifferent in all the ways it always had been. Right, he said again, which was not because there was nothing to say. It was because there were some things you did not say in the afternoon on a canyon floor in the aftermath of a battle to a man who was still finding out who he was. Later. Evening came the way evenings came in the Nevada desert. Gold, then violet, then stars beginning to appear at the edges. Sorath had, through channels Dex did not fully follow, arranged for a diplomatic vessel. Not a warship, a ship belonging to a part of Sovereign Reach's structure that the Council had not touched. It would take time to arrive. 72 hours approximately. 72 hours, an enormous amount of time. More time than Dex had felt like he had in years. He found Aelith at the canyon entrance as the light went gold, standing where the walls opened to the desert, looking out at the flat expanse going orange and rose in the dying sun. He stood beside her. Your father, he said. Resting, Orin is with him. Good. A comfortable silence. The kind that accumulates between people who have stopped needing to fill the space. He said something, Aelith said, when we were alone, when I told him about the treaty, what I found in the archive. She paused. He said your mother would have been glad it was you. She always said you were the one who would know what to do with it. Dex let that stay in the air. She used to say, Aelith continued, that some people know how to carry weight without letting the weight carry them. A pause. My father said she knew that about me when I was very small, before I knew it about myself. Dex looked at her profile, the golden light on her golden hair, the silver in her eyes catching the last of the sun. She was right, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. Very direct, very close, very aware of the distance between them and of the fact that it was different from what it had been. Dex. Yeah. What happens now? He thought about the real question inside the question, not the diplomatic vessel, not Voss, not the treaty broadcast, not the council's dismantling, not any of the enormous complicated machinery that was now in motion and would need addressing for years. What do you want to happen? He said. She held his gaze. I want... She stopped, turned back to the desert, something working in her face that was private and was also slowly becoming something less guarded. I have been alone for a very long time. I built a life that fit around the aloneness. I told myself it was strength. I told myself it was what the work required. A pause. And then I crashed in your desert. My desert, he said. It is your desert. Something moved at the corner of her mouth, the near smile. And you pulled me out of a crater and gave me soup made from a bird and taught me what tripwires were and sat next to me when I cried about my brother and told me every true thing you had even when you did not have to. She paused. I am not the same person who was in that crater. Neither am I, Dex said quietly. The person who couldn't sit in his chair anymore and got on the bike because something fell out of the sky, that person thought he was done. With most things, with wanting things. A pause. I was wrong about that. Yes, she said. You were. He looked at her. She looked at him. And the thing that had been in every careful moment between them, in every half second longer than necessary, every deliberate step back, Every look filed away for later stopped being something he was managing, because later was now. He took her hand, careful, deliberate, the way you take something you intend to keep. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at him. I should tell you, he said, I don't know how any of this works. Practically, two different worlds, all the logistics of that. I have no idea how. Neither do I, she said. Right. We will figure it out. That's your plan. It is the beginning of a plan. It really isn't. It is the correct beginning, she said, with the certainty she used for things she had decided completely, flat and precise and not available for argument. Everything else comes after that. He looked at her for a moment. This woman who had fallen out of the sky and landed in his desert and rearranged the entire architecture of what he understood his life to be. Who had been alone as long as he had and had carried it with a grace he was still learning to name. Who said what she meant and meant what she said and had trusted him with the most important thing she owned before she had any rational reason to. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, and neither of them moved away. Night came properly. The stars appeared, dense and close and unchanged by any of what had happened below them. The same stars he had watched from the camp chair for 3 years, except now she was standing beside him. And she was naming them, not all of them, the ones she knew in her own language, the names coming back through the translation device or not coming through at all, staying in the original sounds. Musical, precise, something in them that had no equivalent and did not need one. He listened. That one, he said at one point, pointing, which that cluster or the single star at the edge, single star, blue-white. She paused. That is mine, she said, quietly. My system. Looks cold, he said. She looked at him, remembering. He could see her remembering. The first night, the fire, the beginning of something neither of them had had a word for. It is not cold, she said. It only looks cold from here. The color is not the temperature. Your mother's line, he said. Yes. She looked at the star. Everything that matters looks cold from a distance. We mistake the color for the temperature. We decide something is cold because we are looking at it from too far away to feel it. He looked at the star, then at her face in the starlight, eyes that were silver and violet and entirely themselves. Not from here, he said. She turned, looked at him. No, she said. Not from here. Cade found them some time later. He moved without sound and came to stand on Dex's other side. They stood, the three of them, at the canyon entrance, looking at the desert and the stars and the particular large quiet of a Nevada night that has nothing to say about any of what it witnessed. My father is asking about you, Cade said, to Dex. What about me? He wants to know who you are. A pause. I told him the man who kept her alive. Dex said nothing. He said that is not all he is. Cade was quiet for a moment, the words slightly difficult for him still, not because he did not mean them, but because the mechanisms for saying them were still being rebuilt. I think he is right. Aelith looked at her brother, then at Dex. Dex looked at the stars. One thing at a time, he said. Yes, Cade said. There is time. And that was the thing. That was exactly the thing. He had not felt that in 11 years. Not since the mission. Not since the 4 names. Not since he had driven his life into the middle of a desert and told himself this was what was left and it would have to be enough. Time. The sense of moving towards something rather than away from everything. Soreth came to find him the next morning. He moved differently from the day before. Less of the weight he had carried into the canyon. Not less presence, less burden. The distinction between a man carrying authority and a man carrying the full awareness of how he had used it. My daughter tells me, he said, standing beside Dex looking at the canyon walls, that without you she would have died in the wreckage. She would have been found eventually, Dex said, by the council's people. A pause. Yes, a silence. She also tells me, Soreth said, that you already knew things about our civilization that she had not told you before she told you. There's a man on this planet, Dex said, a retired general. He has been privately managing knowledge of sovereign reach for 18 years, for his own purposes. He's the one who had me placed out here. He's the one who positioned the tracking suppression around the crash site. Sorath was quiet, processing. And you have documentation. Yes. A longer pause. Then the problem is larger than the council. Yes, Dex said. It is. Will you? Soreth stopped. The formality of what he needed to ask sitting at odds with what he actually needed to say. He tried again. I am asking for your help with what comes next, not in any official role, because another pause, because you are someone my daughter trusts completely, and I have spent 20 years of governance learning that this is the rarest currency there is. Dex looked at the blast marks on the canyon wall, at the day those marks recorded. One condition, he said, name it. The man on this planet, what he did to my team, 4 soldiers who died in a mission that was designed to fail because they knew too much about a program they hadn't consented to. He looked at Sorath directly. That gets addressed through whatever diplomatic channel exists. It gets addressed properly. Sorath met his eyes, steady. Yes, he said. It does, you have my word. A pause. Then yes, Dex said. I'm in. The diplomatic vessel arrived at dawn 2 days later. Controlled descent, soft landing on the flat desert to the north of the canyon, dark blue against the orange rock, the hatch opening, people emerging who moved like delegates, like representatives of an institution trying to reconstitute itself after a significant fracture. Dex stood and watched it come, Aelith beside him, Cade on her other side, Sorath a half step behind. She turned to him. I have to go in, she said. I know. It's going to be. I know. She looked at him, both of them in the near smile territory, both of them fully aware of what was in the space between them and not pretending otherwise. Come with me, she said, not asking if he was ready, not checking if he was certain. Just come with me. The way you say something when you have already decided and the only remaining question is one of proximity and direction. He looked at the ship. The people from Sovereign Reach, the Nevada desert spreading out behind him in every direction it had always spread, brown and orange and vast and utterly indifferent to all of this. He thought about the camp chair, the cold coffee, 3 years of mornings watching a sky that was not going to give him anything because he had stopped being the kind of person who looked for things. He thought, I am a different kind of person now. He took her hand. Let's go, he said. She looked at their joined hands, then at him. And for the first time, not the almost smile, not the near expression, not the border of the thing, an actual smile. Full and real and entirely unhidden. Devastating in the specific way that something is devastating when you were not prepared for it and find you could not have been. He was going to have to get used to not being prepared. He thought he could live with that. They walked toward the ship, behind them the canyon, the desert, the Nevada sky going full morning blue, the place where 2 worlds had arrived in the same dark and neither of them had been the same after. Ahead, something without a name yet, which was fine. Names came after. First you walked toward the thing, then when you were close enough to see it clearly, you named it. Somewhere in a storage unit in Reno, Nevada, 5 signal suppression units sat in a duffel bag with Dex Harlan's name on the inventory tag. Waiting. And on a device damaged in the Cascade blast, a device that had belonged to a man who had been built into someone else and was now being rebuilt from the inside out. One recovered fragment at a time, a signal pulsed. Faint, steady, still there.